Hi everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion on the full ecosystem of building. Net zero is a buzzword at the moment, and so is green building. It's so topical. So today we've pulled together an incredible panel of experts with diverse skill sets from different countries to discuss what the future of this topic really is. So I'm going to allow them to all introduce themselves, starting with Shamir, and they're going to run through, and then we're going to get on with the questions.
Great, thanks very much, Rosanna, and thank you for inviting us to this panel discussion. I'm really pleased to be here with so many great peers from around the world. To look forward to sharing some incredible perspectives with everybody. Just by way of introduction, my name is Shamir. I'm the Global Director responsible for the BREEAM assessment methodology around the world. BREEAM itself was the pioneering standard of its time back in 1990. So after 30 years, which we celebrated last month, rather quietly, with all the things going on, we are very much looking forward to how do we really accelerate and change the narrative around what do we mean by assurance, accreditation, certification, and kind of ensure that there's credibility and truth in all the things and outcomes that we're trying to drive forward for sustainability in the built environment around the world, and make it more accessible, equitable, and transparent for all stakeholders involved. So really looking forward to the conversation. I think there's an awful lot more we can share about what we're planning to do with BREEAM going forward for the next 30 years and beyond. And so much of this has to be in collaboration with so many stakeholders to make it truly viable and move from what has perhaps been quite a fringe activity for a small proportion of the built environment going for accredited schemes and certification to a mass sport where actually everybody can feel they can take part in some capacity and therefore truly deliver the sense of urgency that we are now faced with as humanity. So thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to taking part.
Great. David, over to you.
Hey, my name is David Willock. I'm Managing Director of Origination and Sustainability in Commercial Banking at Lloyds Bank. So for those that don't know what Lloyds Bank is all about, we're one of the largest UK lenders across the consumer space, but also the commercial space, which specifically in this context where it becomes relevant is real estate and housing. So we're one of the largest lenders to the built environment in the UK. So as a consequence of that, I'm Managing Director of our sustainability sort of program within the commercial bank. So what does that mean I spend my time doing? We have green lending and sustainability linked lending products, which we can talk about a bit later, but also increasingly, to pick up on something Shamir mentioned, we're financiers, not environmentalists or indeed surveyors in most cases. So we acknowledge that we need to collaborate increasingly on these topics to get the right outcomes. So I'm responsible for partnerships and making those happen. So yeah, really pleased to be here. Look forward to the conversation.
Great, thank you. Jason?
Hi, I'm Jason Longus. I'm the chair of UK Business Council for Sustainable Development. We are the UK branch of the World Business Council. So we connect both globally, but also within the UK. We bring together some of the leading innovation companies and leaders shaping a sustainable growth agenda. So our focus really is about sustainable development. And I think the buzzword of today is what we mean by a green recovery, green economy, and green build. So our focus is really how we shape that agenda. And we're now been championing this agenda for 21 years as part of a global compact in terms of how we look at the agenda of sustainable build and sustainable growth. So I think it's long overdue environment, and the fact we talk about this now as a commercial and investable offer, I think is the challenge as we all face what comes next. So that's what we do.
Great, thank you, Jason. And James?
Yeah, thank you very much, and it's great to be here. As background, I'm the director of capital markets for the state of New York's two bond programs, which is the Housing Finance Agency, which is their multifamily program, as well as their State of New York Mortgage Agency, which is a single family program. And right now we're sort of in the middle of Governor Cuomo's 100,000 unit affordable housing plan. We're about 2/3 to $20 billion plan. And as background, a lot of people don't know about, affordable housing agencies in the US, but we obviously are a public-private partnership using, public debt as well as, government resources to bring together. We have about a $20 billion debt portfolio at the agency. But in fact, if you think about it, the leverage that we bring with bonds to real estate. So for example, every year we do about $1 billion of bonds, but that's really about $4 billion of actual development costs, which includes subsidy tax credits and other things. But it's sort of a unique vehicle to the United States. But I think that one of the things that we've done as an agency is really be sort of a leader nationally on the US muni market around sustainability. The HFA side won Sustainability of the Year last year for, really thinking about what does the future of finance look like as it pertains to sort of green finance. We were one of the first issuers to use CPI, and part of that is to just focus on how do you credit and the performance of the asset are inexorably linked. And so as we think about finance and we think about financing these green assets, it's about how do you bring the characteristics of what you're financing to the table to show that you're financing a better product that merits long-term investment in capital. And that's what we've done at the state. And that's what I'm looking forward to talk about with this group is obviously the nature of the performance of the asset, what that means and how that translates to performance.
Amazing. Thank you, James. And Joseph, you're on mute.
the tech kid did it, right? Tech kid clicked on mute. So yeah, thanks guys. I'm Joseph Daniels, CEO and founder of Project Utopia Group. Utopia was derived from homelessness as a young man to combat the overall housing crisis, but look at it from more of a global spectrum. And the reason I'm so proud to be a part of this working group is I've spent the last 6 to 8 years working on delivering net zero building solutions that recognize accreditation, banking, retail finance, state and government initiatives, and policy and sustainable agendas. And by using the building blocks, as it were, as pieces of that recovery and that solution. So I spent a long time developing out across the globe and bringing all of these different complex elements of legislation together to deliver an asset, as James has mentioned, that repeats performance time and time again, but gives the consumer the Tesla of housing, the iPhone of the home, if you were. And that in principle is why I'm here today to discuss with this group what that looks like going forward for the future.
Great, thank you, Joseph. And just, I was so excited to introduce our amazing panel that I actually forgot to introduce myself, but they are great, so you can forgive me. So my name is Rosanna Lawn. I'm the Brand and Strategic Partnership Director at Project Utopia, which means I help curate the message for the masses on what Utopia is trying to deliver. And I get to work with all these wonderful people day to day, just trying to join up those dots on how we can work more collaboratively as an industry. So that's why I'm here. Jason, let's start by asking you a question first. From your perspective, can you explain what building green actually means and how companies and governments are really looking to implement greener agendas and strategies? And I suppose, how much of a role do the SDGs of the United Nations play within all of that?
I'll take the easy question, that's fine.
I feel like there was 3 in 1, but just go for it.
So to solve the housing crisis in a green way that's sustainable, I think was the question. I think that the term green build for me is about the sustainable approach that we're looking at, which is everything from the build standard, the quality, as well as the health and well-being within that. And I think certainly the environment we're living in is understanding that green build is an opportunity now of how we have a positive disruptor to traditional ways of planning and developing housing. And I think it's all development. So for us, it's understanding that whole life cycle element of construction and development. It's the sustainability at the core of that. So for us, we heavily champion what I call outcome benefits of taking such an approach, that this isn't about just being green in the traditional sense. This is about what I call enviroeconomics. It's investable, it's deliverable, and the critical one that's always been a barrier for this type of debate is that this investable approach means we deliver tangible projects at the end of it. So hitting net zero, that's something that people can buy into, that is viable and critically affordable, for me is the really capturing the heart of what we mean about green building. And certainly in the UK, the challenges ahead of that has to be in policy. It has to be, as we've got around the panel at the moment, the ability to invest in that. It's about how you actually deliver it. It's also that standard for me. It's that whole ecosystem pitch that has to be right. So this isn't any longer a little standalone discussion. This has to be, as we class it, a positive disruption. So this is the opportunity to mainstream this. And for us, that mainstreaming has to be that the outcome benefits are ticking almost every box, if not all boxes, against the Sustainable Development Goals. So that global view of this is core to what we promote and see the challenge ahead. So if green build is now the viable future, which I think it is, you've got a panel of people that have each component part that drive it. So that's how we see it.
I think just to pick up on that, Jason, I think people struggle with quantifying actually how they measure up against the SDGs as companies, as construction, all across different industries. And I think that's one of the big stumble blocks of actually aligning companies with the SDGs. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think everyone comes at it, I could be shot to bits now. I think everyone comes at this with a bit more action based. It's about ticking boxes rather than the outcome benefit. So I think any organization, any approach, any project, and we work with a lot of the leading organizations that are shaping this agenda, it's the outcome benefit where you can show contribution across the range, whether it's your employees, your team, yourself, how your organization delivers, as well as the product and performance. So I think for the first time ever, we're putting that all together. And weirdly, the SDGs make sense as a way of outcome capturing an outcome benefit. So that to us is a real metric for measuring where we can all contribute. Now it's the level of contribution that I think is the challenge going forwards. Unfortunately, we come from a world where you sort of target one outcome, which is either profit or benefit or one specific element. And I think this is the opportunity to actually say, yeah, different design, different concept, different approaches, different organizations can contribute against a range of outcomes. Some will be at 100%, some will be 5%, but it's that total impact you can actually have.
And just, sorry, one last question. Just on that, are you finding, because you obviously are an organisation that represent a number of different companies and businesses, and you're often liaising across the industry in many different ways, are you finding that people are really focusing on the SDGs, or are they only starting to really understand what they could mean for business now?
I think the last year, I was about to say, has been interesting to say the least. We started the year with a lot of expectation with COP26 that we were going to be talking about what a green economy looks like. I think we come out the back end of the year that actually that's been made more realistic by things like COVID and the challenges there. So for me, it's really defining that benefit. And I think we are seeing companies move from ESG thinking, which is more about the individual organization itself, to actually that broader impact benefit. And I think if you're looking at investing in this, then you're reaching for, well, what are the metrics of that? If you're an individual that is looking for affordable living, then you're starting to think further ahead. And that is where you get into the efficiency, the design, the concept of all of this in one go. So yeah, I think there is a shift. I think the SDGs are still at the forefront of that coming forwards. Great.
And just to move this over to Shamir, so the sustainability agenda has been around for a really long time, and there is quite a huge effort at the moment to really ramp up the efforts due to climate emergencies. Obviously, we're seeing it every single day. What do you feel the role of accreditations within this are, and how do you feel that they can assist with kind of driving this green agenda, and especially in a more digitalized world?
Yeah, thank you. Good question. I think particularly for me, it comes down to kind of a few key principles. I guess one is about the interconnectivity of it. So certification, as we know it, cannot be seen in isolation. And I think which is why being part of this kind of conversation is so critical, because how does certification and assurance build trust in the systems that others are trying to finance, enable, and deliver against in a way that is credible, accessible, but equally has to complement the system. Because if we don't start to sort of almost re-engineer or pivot around what we mean by assurance and certification, then we will continuously be in a world where, BREEAM has been around for 30 years, LEED 25, and many of the schemes a bit less. But even when you added up all of those assets that are certified around the world, it equates to a single-digit percentage of the built environment, and that cannot be right. And I think, just as Jason was referring to, we've got a real moment now. COVID, to a degree, has, aside from the tragic human costs and the social impacts it's having, which are being felt in a hugely unequal way throughout society, but it has catalyzed an awful lot of things that certainly in commercial real estate and the built environment that perhaps was starting to evolve and merge. The usage of offices. Do we need 6,000 people in one location at one point in time every day of the week? Probably not. But if we'd said to them, well, let's all try working from home at scale next week, they probably would have said, well, it can't be done, it's a bit difficult. So we're really, having had to adapt, it's given us an opportunity to kind of reimagine the workplace in a completely different way. And with that, all of these systems have to kind of find a way to coalesce and work together so that we can, as adaptable as the built environment physically has to be, our places of work, our places of home and leisure and everything else, it's becoming much more interconnected, and in some cases, physically adapting from one to the other. So we've got to absolutely, provide that assurance, provide that credibility, but in a way that is much, much more accessible to more people, and to be able to focus, as David and Jason were already referring to, about the outcomes that we're looking to achieve. So if it's a net zero agenda, okay, are we talking about social equity? Are we talking about reducing fuel poverty? Are we talking about access to clean, resources? So, which is why we do see and absolutely recognise the role that BREEAM has in the global stage, alongside the SDGs, as being a complementary part of the service and part of the system within which we need to operate. And I think I'd probably just refer to another point here, is that as much as we've seen global movement and clearly the sense of urgency to respond to the pandemic in a global way that perhaps no one could really have foreseen, and now there are calls for the world to respond to the climate change agenda in as much urgency as we have seen with COVID, and the biodiversity crisis that is looming large right now and has been for some time. So as a species, we have just realized that we can do quite a lot when we get our act together, and now we need to actually get on and deliver.
And just on that, Shamir, obviously you said there's only a small percentage of buildings that are actually BREEAM accredited around the world. If we're driving in a sustainable agenda and accreditation is going to be a core part of that, or we looked for accreditation to be a core part of that, how do we ramp up the ability to accredit these buildings? I'm assuming it's lack of resources that may be an issue, as well as, I suppose, buildings that actually qualify.
I think it is many-fold, isn't it? So we are now actively working with a number of global investors and financiers to say, well, actually, why don't, rather than let's talk about a single building or two buildings here and there, let's talk about 500 assets in a portfolio, actually, and the geography doesn't matter. We're present in half of the world already. So the scheme we know can work, and let's find alternative models within which to work with the supply chain, work with other partners. So yes, the cost impact is massively reduced. It makes it more attractive for more people to take part. And I think it's also, we've got to be clearer around what are you actually, what's the tangible benefit you're getting? Because if it's not connected to a green mortgage or finance or green bonds or whatever else it might be, then in isolation, you're only ever going to look at the impacts and the resource requirements of that one activity unto itself. Whereas actually, if it's part of a system and has an integrated kind of connectivity and value, and is enabled, unlocked loads more value for the asset owner, for the tenant, for the occupier, for the investor, for the client, the FM managers, and so on, it starts to become much more integrated, and therefore you're not just trying to, come back to Joseph's kind of example. You don't go out sort of to buy autonomous driving. You're buying into the package of what a Tesla service provides you, and actually then if the package is what you're actually after, and more and more this type of dialogue that we enable does gradually move us to a system where it is truly a system rather than an aggregation of parts.
Great, and I think that moves us really nicely on to David, actually. Obviously from Lloyd's, dealing with the finance of all of these. What do you look for when you're kind of investing in underwriting green assets, and how can this be perhaps improved moving forward to support today's infrastructure and to support what we're hoping to build in the future, which is much more sustainable cities and communities?
Cool. Okay. I'll do my best to try and answer that, and we'll see how we get on. But I think the way I thought of it is to probably give you like 3 reference points, which I think would be quite handy to frame it. Is that when we launched so I'm going to predominantly talk about commercial bank lending. I'm not a retail mortgage lender, so I'll leave that where it is, but I can touch on that as we go if we need to. But if I look at when we launched our green lending initiative, the £1 billion green lending initiative we launched in 2016, it was a pretty sparse competitive environment for green loans in commercial real estate. So that was really interesting. And what we did at that time, we decided, we're financiers, we're not sustainability people. So we worked with True Cost and collaborated to create a scorecard. And without going into loads of detail, basically you're looking at counterparty assessment, you're looking at project assessment, portfolio assessment, and asset assessment. So it's a sort of amalgamation of things. But then you sort of get to a point of so what? So that's how you decide whether someone or something is in or out. But then it's really, we decided our finance was about improving real estate rather than just financing green real estate, which obviously things have evolved a bit. So we actually then put covenants on those companies and those assets to say, actually, we want to see you improve these assets over the life of the loan. So it might be things like energy intensity. It might be stuff like green leases. It might be stuff like a certain amount of capex. So that was 2016. Felt like a very different time. We actually led on a discounted product because we felt, to Shamir's point, the market needed incentives. You fast forward to now, I'd really describe it as, what does good look like? So suddenly it feels like it's broken through the mainstream, and it can feel a little bit like 1 step forward and 2 steps back, because like this topic of what is a green asset? Well, actually, if you ask someone, they might say it's an EPC-A. And actually the challenge we've got in commercial real estate and real estate generally in the UK, I'm not sure about everywhere else, actually that is just a tiny bit of the iceberg, right? We know that. But I think increasing amount of stakeholders are coming to this table and saying, actually, what does good look like? What do I look like, actually? And we're seeing a convergence. Things like the Good Economy currently out with a white paper on ESG framework for social housing, things like the World Economic Forum ESG framework, things like science-based lending initiatives and obviously certification. So, science-based target initiatives. So an EU taxonomy. So you're starting to see all these things get into place. But I think where I'm really excited, TCFD has obviously played a massive part on that in terms of lenders too. I think where I just finish off in terms of where we go next, I guess, is it feels like the future is going to be quite interesting, because it does feel like it's just the beginning, really, as we start to see investors and a whole manner of stakeholders start to swing this way in terms of capital allocation. So I think it's quite exciting, but I do think that it needs a degree of real conscious convergence and transparency, because to Shamir's point, it's about doing the right things and making sure we are doing the right things. And as financiers, we don't have all the answers. So I'll leave you with my favorite quote. So I decided to go and do a master's at Cambridge that I'm currently doing, because it's just really difficult, right? And I needed to go and find out more about it. And one of the very few things I've learned so far, a couple of months in, is, academics call this a super wicked problem, and not in a good way. That climate change is a super complicated thing to solve. And the only way we're going to really do that is through collaboration on an interdisciplinary basis, to make sure actually, actors do what they think they're doing in the right way. And just on that note, I'll leave you, we've agreed to commit to reduce the carbon we finance by 2030 by 50%. So that is a really, really big number. And to do that, we need to work in completely different ways. So I think to the future of our financing products, I think what you'll see from us and others is a real innovation and evolution in sort of linking between brown and green. And I think I'll leave on that point of the carrot and stick. And I think Jason mentioned everyone's got their part to play. So you've got a regulation piece, you've got a finance piece, you've got an investor piece, but then you've actually got the owners and occupiers of these buildings as well. So I think that carrot and stick piece is going to be really interesting going forward.
Great, thank you. And talking about buildings, perhaps we should hand over to Joseph. He's actually building some of these green buildings with Project Utopia. It's really incredible, actually, the level of performance that you've managed to achieve with the buildings at Utopia. And I guess the question is kind of what is the secret, and also what's holding you back from kind of world domination if the product is so good?
I think, it's this convergence. I think we're all talking about it, and I'm actually glad in a way that James gets the jump on after me, because I thought James was going to jump on before, but there's so many points that we've all just made that the state of New York are currently actively taking on now, which I think is that convergence point. It is an evidence. It is a protocol that is working. We talk about one thing is like building regulation, and we talk about today. 1974 was when our planning system in the UK was actually changed. In 2006, we had code. All of a sudden, that was abolished because the traditional program didn't fit the mold. And now we talk about MMC, modern methods of construction. There's nothing modern about a lot of these systems that go up. And I think what we can talk about now is sustainability as a true core, and the three pillars therein, the social, the environmental, the economical. And we can understand the inputs and outputs. I think that's really important, is understanding, okay, so we're all coming together here. What do we all need to see as policy at government in Jason's, as Shamir running, Brian, David in commercial mortgage, James working with, what do we all need to see to enable us to make an informed decision that this is best practice for investment, building and delivery? And I think that is that kind of sustainable pillar. We need to see economics. Does it make sense? We need to see environmental, and we're talking embodied carbon and operational carbon. And then you have to say social. How is this going to how is that person going to be inside it? Or how is that, when you put those blocks together, going to build community? How is that going to be done? We live in a world now where I can master plan using gaming engines and drop one in, am I allowed to say where? In upstate New York. And it looks there, and you can walk in it. But yet we're here, and we're working with a system that's so here. And I think the uptake this year, and I think everyone's points, 100% right. COVID has made us act fast, and we've actually gone, was it really that difficult? All right, we might have a year of hurt because the traditional builders don't really want the program to go ahead. But is there a company like Utopia that will give their net zero building solution powered by Code to them? Have they even asked? Has a company gone to Tesla and said, can I have your battery bank and your hard software? Because I tell you right now, if Elon Musk has sat down with Mercedes, which he did recently, and go, look, you can have the basics, but we're going to run the computing software and the battery. You put your shell around it. Of course, Tesla would say yes. Why? Because he's about enabling the autonomous industry, the vehicle industry, and enabling autonomy on roads. It's the same with us. We want to enable net zero building, and that's working with developers, that's working with partners. But before we can get there, before we can get working with big developers, big landowners, and all this good talk, whether it's the big ones in the UK or the big ones in New York, we have to get the accreditation right, we have to get the commercial banking right, we have to get the policy alignment right, and we have to get the government or states support. If you can bring those things together in the right way, the dominoes will fall. And I hope that we are an evidence of that solution. We're evidence of a product. And okay, we're only competing with traditional costing, but it's net zero. And if we can prove that today, we can work on a program, even though you're just hitting the mark or maybe just over the mark today. What's it going to be like in 5 years' time? What's it going to be like in 10 years' time with economies to scale? And I think I'm lovely to pass it over to James on this next one, because he has done that with the state of New York, and they are taking huge strides. And it's amazing at this time to see something as a state working so hard on this, but achieving goals as well, especially given the current political climate globally. So yeah, that's kind of my opinion on bringing the pieces together now and saying now is the time.
Great, thank you, Joe. And I'll hand over to James as a final piece of the puzzle. Quite an interesting one, because the rest of our speakers are actually based out of the UK, albeit some of their reach is global. James, you're in America, a completely different landscape to perhaps what we see in the UK, different regulations, different requirements. So it'd be great to hear from you actually on the subject, and kind of how green finance can serve as a catalyst for further greening of the construction industry, what your experience of the US is. And also, I know that Joe's just obviously mentioned about taking the Utopia system to the US, kind of how that's working as well, because it works really well in the UK, but how's it going down in the US?
Thanks. Yeah, I think David made a really interesting point. It's like, what does good look like? And I think sort of Samir was talking a little bit about, like, what are the barriers to entry to sort of scale, right? And sort of that's kind of, I think the one thing, Joseph, when you were in sort of the whole list of things that checks the box, the one thing that sort of is the end of that, I believe, and for us, because we are sort of using the capital markets, but generally it's sort of building performance, but is on the disclosure, data, and performance. And I think at the end of the day, your asset looks very different when you can disclose out exactly the performance of it. And I think that as a result, it changes what you can actually finance. And so if I think about where we are in terms of green finance at the state, we take all of these different components of the sources and the resources that come in, looking at the characteristics, what is the building performance? For example, in the last official statement that we just sold debt, we were the first time in the US we offered up our floodplain disclosure for the first time as it pertains to our project. Because investors are more and more looking at sort of larger climate risk and as it pertains to sort of performance of the asset again. So I think that for our perspective, we are very much focusing on how do you source more capital? How do you deepen the pools of capital? And I think part of it's just telling the story, right? The narrative of what you're financing. Good people are looking, there's so many people are looking for passive assets. There's no better passive asset than a mortgage-backed security that's out for 30 years in the US. It's going to sit there, especially if it's backing a really green asset. In our case, if it's helping to move someone from homelessness to supportive housing. And so if you put these pictures together, and in our disclosure document, we tell the story of the green building, of the communities that we're serving, how we're taking dollars to transform, in very meaningful ways. A lot of our big, the governor declared affordable housing development essential very early on during COVID so that we can continue to do it, because one, we know that the need for affordable housing is only going to be greater on the other side of this. And for us, if you think about it, the ability to sort of green a building, we are reducing long-term volatility in operating expenditure ultimately. And sort of for people who don't have massive sources of income, the ability to sort of stabilize the performance of a building is hugely important. And you think about that. And us as a financer of building, I can say that I believe from a risk perspective, I am de-risking my portfolio by the greener and the higher performance. And so one of the things that we found interesting, back to Samir's point a little bit, is we need as a state to figure out how resources can be sort of brought in. And I think pre-development dollars for folks, as they think about greening existing buildings, even thinking about exploring, I want to get a new home, I want to find the greenest home possible. How can I, like, the resources up front? And what you realize is, though, when you choose something, for us, for example, like putting solar panels on existing buildings and going and retrofitting, right? Those are financeable solutions. Like, you can take the pre-development dollars that are needed for accreditation and wrap that into the actual financing solution. So I think, as everyone's sort of talking to, is how do you bring it together? And for us, the best thing that we've been able to do really is be transparent, show the world the data, what we're financing. The down on the single family mortgage lending, we show people the area median income that we serve, the data down to the very, we're serving all parts of the state. So the data and the performance, I think, are the sort of next generation. If you look at the International Capital Markets Association this summer, they released a KPI linked bond. And I think that as, people go into, investors, banks go into looking at, if you have 10 buildings that come apply to you, which one are you going to take? You're going to take the one that you can be pretty assured is going to be the least risky at some point. And I think that in some respects, looking for the better asset, as folks alluded to, is exactly that. And the better asset, we all want that on our books. So that is where it is better for the world. And this is it. Like, if a building is not sustainable, that's not good for the building. That means it's not going to last. Sustainability is a necessity to survival, right? By its very nature. And so that's why making sure that bringing these factors together for us is really important. And just real quick on the upstate, it's obviously, finding, a solution, that we believe can be transformative. I mean, obviously we're in the construction space all the time, and we are always looking for solutions to make ourselves better. That's what government is supposed to do, is listen, and say, how can we learn and implement policies where we can sort of be the best that we can be? And so, obviously there's, transfer of land in a town and this and that and the other things, but it's exciting, to be around folks like this and be around people that are thinking about how to best redirect resources to align capital, to align developers, to align finance around these factors is really important.
Thanks, James. And just on that, is there specific metrics that you're using to measure kind of the building performance or kind of to use as the kind of benchmark of whether it is a green bond or a green finance product?
Yeah, that's really great, actually. So what we've done as an agency for the last 5 years, I believe, we've required benchmarking with every single basically development that we finance. We also use the Climate Bond Initiative as a proxy for a bond finance program, which is about 15% above ASHRAE for a reduction in sort of carbon emissions. And so, we look at sort of in the US, we use the APA energy standards, which is obviously in flux given the craziness of the EPA. And but the real answer is that the EPA 2020 guidelines that are supposed to be coming out this year focus on sort of achieving that. Obviously on retrofits a little bit different, but I think that, we want to capture that data. And I think the next iteration for us, I mean, think about this. The challenge of government is that it's resources, right? We have a finite amount of people that it can accomplish a lot serving, 20 plus million people in the state of New York, 300 million in the United States. Think about globally, how do you serve all these people? Government is way outmanned in this situation. So the best thing that we can do is equip ourselves with the resources to go solve problems. And I think that technology is going to be a huge part of that. Having come from sort of a technology space, like government's ability to solve its problems using technology, and especially thinking through buildings, looking at performance of buildings, using, digital IPNAs to sort of be able to look at performance and say, like, you know what, why is this building not performing? Like, we have 350,000 units that sit in the state of New York's affordable housing portfolio. My belief is that a decade from now, I can tell you which buildings on a daily basis have bad performance. We're not there yet, but I believe that's where we have to go. And then look at things like heat pumps and other things where you can sort of look at really changing the true efficiency of a building.
And do you know what I love about that is because for you, sustainable buildings and these kind of technology advanced buildings are what you're using for your affordable solution. And in the UK, we see it as such a luxury at the moment because we're still trying to break that mold of how do we make it affordable. And it just shows, I suppose, the disparity of where we both are in our different kind of sustainable journeys, I suppose.
If you can solve, my motto in life is that the happy and healthy person is the least expensive person. And if we can solve for the human being by finding them housing, if you can solve for the affordable housing, everything else will fall in place.
So that is exactly every point you've just made there is isolated into the where I come from as a human being and the why Utopia exists. And I did I was writing some bits for Homes England. Homes England are now the British government is saying sustainability is a key. I know, we've got tradition. I think tradition, we can never underestimate the British tradition, and that has held us back since the Industrial Revolution. We were like, yeah, we're the first to do it. Let's set all these rules. No. And then they spiral out under 40 governments. However, but if you really put into perspective, the economic impact on a human in the UK as an example, the UK average home is £237,000. but the average yearly bill on that home is around £1,345. So over a 25-year mortgage life, so over the 25 years you get a mortgage, it's the equivalent of 14% or £33,000 on a home. So if you take away that requirement on someone that's trying to get a mortgage that's middle income or higher income, they can get more on their mortgage, therefore get more for themselves. But if you do what James has just said and outline the impact on the affordable program, and you can really introduce net zero as a pure sustainability point, we're then able to gather all that information and data, as you just said, and provide it at the bottom end, which means more savings, which means more requirement, at the bottom end of the institute. Therefore, you're slowly building up that economic gap, which for me was always the hugest thing. I was homeless in London, and I can tell you right now from being homeless in London that the disparity is insane. You've got people that can't have no money, but you've got Lamborghinis driving streets. And I think that the ability to bring up that affordability, bring that affordable, what we call affordable, which most, by the way, now key workers, try and meet someone in the NHS that isn't in affordable housing in London, which is crazy. And I think the differentiator is that impact point. And I think, James, you're right. And then the state of New York clearly leaders in it. I think we'd all agree here that is a program we'll have to work towards. And I noticed as well, like David and Shamir, you've got your hands up here as well.
I think David was first.
Okay. I just wanted to come in on a couple of things. James mentioned around the tech and the optionality of technology and what it allows us, I think, to scale up. And I just wanted to give an anecdote from our experience, really, in that, we launched the £1 billion Green Lending Initiative. Great, we fully deployed it. But then when you actually step back, you look at it and go, well, we transacted with people like BlackRock, Bruntwood, Unibuy, Rodemco, Great Portland Estate. So these are all, when you step back, really great companies, and we're really proud of what we did. But actually, then we step back another level and go, hang on, we finance, tens of billions of pounds of assets. So how do we scale that up? So we've just launched our green building tool to basically give it for free to all of our commercial banking clients to say, right, we need to really massively wave through a lot more activity to start driving mostly the retrofit, this focus on the retrofit. So I think that point about technology is super important, about how to, there's no point really having a sort of, perfect cupboard in a house that's falling down is the analogy I always use. We need to really move everyone on. And I think the other thing that often comes up in these discussions is the concept of value. And I think that's a really fascinating point for an interdisciplinary conversation in the near term and the midterm is, we've got the RICS definition of market value, but then concurrently we're being asked to look at what's the value of this asset or this portfolio of assets in 25 years time. These are very different things. So I think how the ecosystem in the built environment deals with value is really crucial to this topic. Like you said, Joe, the whole idea of, do consumers really, are we helping consumers understand some of those participation choices that they might have around buildings?
Great, thank you. I think Shamir was next with your hand up.
I think it was just another perspective on some of this, and just listening to everybody. I think that the really pleasing thing is that we're all taking action. I think in certain circumstances, we've all been in panels and conversations where you end up with an echo chamber of everyone kind of sagely agreeing with each other, but we're actually doing stuff. And I think that's a real differential. So I would applaud my co-panelists for actually having the vision and taking action.
Great, thank you. And James, I think you wanted to chime in again, didn't you?
Yeah, just picking up. And I think that the one thing that I think is really important is that this is a question that, this is something Jason talked about. And I think that sort of the idea is we're kind of on the tip of the spear when it comes to thinking about, COVID has I believe massively accelerated sort of the shift of assets towards green assets, the global shift towards green SDGs and other things. And I think that it is a crazy new landscape where everyone is trying to digest exactly what it means. And I think what's really important, and this is what the SDGs can help do, and the same thing that we talked about with Shamir, like with regard to like the importance of accreditation, organizing the market, organizing around labels being able to make it so people understand it, make it digestible. That is so important. The UN SDGs is great because the whole world can sort of, we label, we know that our affordable housing bonds, we were the first US issuer in the US municipal finance market, which is state and local governments basically, to use the UN SDGs to identify our use of proceeds and to link our use of proceeds. And we thought that was, and part of it's because we want to make it easy for the salesperson on the bonds to be able to call the account that cares about it, right? It's linking it up. And part of it is that the organization that Jason was talking about, that how the banking industry, how people have been able to do the organization, the architecture of that market as it moves forward will be massively important. And I think that sort of using a framework like the UN SDGs, for example, to sort of say, this is your higher level architecture, then underneath that, okay, great. So here's your no poverty, right? How do you solve that? Well, great. You have these whole different buckets of things that can help eliminate poverty. And then you sort of begin to classify things into how do you solve that? So, but and frankly, the accreditations, like, are you really solving the environment? Well, great, because I think the big fear we have in the US market is greenwashing. And that's a big fear, is like making sure that the products that people are saying that they're doing, and the only way to get there is through data, transparency, and accreditation until this market sort of is mature, for sure.
Great, thank you, James. Jason, I think you wanted to chime in there. I just want to let you know we've got just under 15 minutes. So if any audience wants to ask any questions, get them in now. But if not, we'll just carry on nattering, I'm sure. Jason, over to you.
Yeah, just building on that last point, I hate it if we all start agreeing, because then we totally destroy the approach we're trying to take in terms of positive challenge. I think, as we've heard from everyone before, getting an integrated approach is quite critical. And I think getting the voices you've got on this actually aligning, that is the hardest bit with the industries globally, of where you can actually unlock and positively disrupt things like a housing economy, because I don't care which side or which country you're actually sitting in. When you start looking at it, the commonality of the failures of the existing housing and development sectors is it doesn't align. So we're not building in technology. We're not, the term we're now pushing over here is a smart construction approach, which is you're integrating the understanding of what it requires to get investment. It's the ability to go at pace, which is also about scale. Can you build at a high quality, at pace, and large numbers? And in the UK, I think for me, the biggest frustration is we don't align that. We don't actually commit to a program. We're unlocking a level of investment which is about quality. And if you're looking at affordability and affordable living, I think this is where we've got to shape and change that. And I think, again, the lineup of panelists today gives you a taster of what it takes to sit around a table and actually set this in stone. The weird challenge, I think, for everyone is the SDGs. They've been there an awful long time, yet when you stand back and just look at the headlines, they're quite basic outcome measures. And I think that's the emphasis for me, or challenge to everyone listening to this, is actually employing those as a measure. We have no common metrics across this, and I think that's the challenge, to get that positive disruption and actually really deliver this stuff tangibly. But that's just my view.
So just to kind of, Shamir, go on, jump in.
I mean, if your points to follow on, by all means, because I was going to act as a bit of a provocateur, not to perhaps allow us all to agree with each other too much more.
No, my question was going to be just a final roundup of all this integration, but I'll let you jump in, Shamir, with your provocative, and I'll save the thought piece till the end.
Okay, let's do that, because I think sometimes we in our industry, globally, I do find some people talk about digital, but probably don't actually deliver, I think. And I think if you've got a Word document, and taking the Word document, putting it as PDF and putting the PDF online is not going digital. And I think there's a real awakening for so many parts of our industry and supply chain to recognize that that is not it. And again, thinking about things in isolation, that if there's no interconnectivity, James has just been talking about data. We're swimming in data right now. It's data flowing all around us in some capacity or another. But actually, without taking that data, applying it in a way that means we've got some genuine information to turn it into real knowledge, where people who are professionals in the built environment around the world in whatever capacity, from whatever angle, it's not an exclusive club, but then we can do something meaningful with it. I think my concern, if I can be provocative, is that there'll be people who will have access to the data and probably will make some poor choices through a lack of a basis of understanding of building science and physics and everything else, and therefore could end up with a risk that we might well undermine some of the outcomes that we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, and I don't disagree. I actually think that, you know, one of the reasons that, as you know, I built one of my first houses at a building research establishment, and my first building was a school, and they're like, why? I'm like, well, it's going to be test run. You best test run it in the most complex environments, and I'm going to go build one in Africa. And they're like, well, you shouldn't be building Africa. And I'm like, no, because when I get a question around, can I build the same thing under different building regulations? Can it be done in the desert, Zojo? Can it be done in tropical, Zojo? And you kind of have to overcome those hurdles. But you're right, you know, there is a level of, I suppose, continuity in your deliverables that you have to achieve. And is the market, you know, I don't think it necessarily is the market ready for it. Is the tech ready? The tech is ready. It's now down, I think, to the actual builders, the actual developers, and like the state of New York are doing, to actually instigate these things and say, actually, no, do you know what? This is the mandate. This is kind of what we're going to fund. This is the regulations and how we're going to fund it. Work with the likes of LEED and BREEAM and, you know, building councils and business councils and, you know, the likes of Lloyd's and JP, and actually set, you know, this is what we need to achieve as a deliverable. This is the minimum criteria, because at the end of it, we want data out the back end. And I think it's that top instigation to say, well, this is the standard that has to be met, that will then issue that on a widespread basis. Because I think in the UK, we don't do that. We're portioned off. We've got white papers for planning, different policies in different counties, codes being abolished, codes being brought back in, modern methods of construction, and then their factory doesn't work because we're not having a singular general message, which is, hi, guys, you know, align with these core principles, which is fuel poverty, you know, and that's not hot, you know, and as David referenced to earlier, what is good? Well, good should always be breaking the boundary. You know, that should be the top standard should be beyond what the testing can do. So EPC beyond 100, but then okay is then within that top realm. And I think bringing all these messages in alignment, and I'm hoping in a digital way, you know, under a single format, will be the driver to change. Will be that, you know, as we've all said, it's that journey, that collective knowledge and message with states saying this is what we want. And I suppose all of us working collaboratively with additional others to say, okay, no, this is the driven message towards a net zero goal. And that is stop the planet being on fire. Literally, that is the motive. The motive is polar ice caps are melting. I'm meant to be going to Antarctica next year with Robert Swan. And he's like, yeah, next year, Joe, is going to be a dodgy year. We got till 2041. And I think that collective message now within COVID is this: government need to generate this, and we need to get the story in the middle right. Because if we're unable to tell that story correctly between the two, the consumers and the states or the governments, we're going to be, I think, misaligned. But I think that's our opportunity right now, and that's our, you know, that should be our, hopefully our next steps.
David, I know that you wanted to jump in next.
Yeah, I guess it's just to really add that in terms of, you know, what we've seen is due to COVID, you know, and also all of the stuff in terms of societal awareness of some of the underlying, like you say, Joe, I think there's a really great opportunity to get front to back on some of this stuff around innovation, because I think the sense I get, and obviously I can talk about this because we've just invested with a very small company to roll out this tool. I think increasingly there's the sort of desire for people to listen and get things front to back, from, you know, ideas into the front end, because like you say, there's a timeline to this stuff, and therefore we can't afford to allow the roots of old, you know, academia to start up to this person knows that person, eventually that person gets to the person, if you see what I mean. We can't afford to have it wired that way anymore, because we need to take, you know, prioritize action. So I think it's exciting in that way as well. You know, I saw a thing the other day about digital twins. I'd never seen it before in my life, and I was a little bit scared and a little bit excited at the same time. It was amazing. And I think there is some cool stuff out there, but we can't rely on technology that we don't know about yet. You know, that's the thing, isn't it? You know, to act now, we need to make the most of what we've got.
Great. And James, did you want to jump in for the last kind of interjection, and then I'll go in with the final thought piece for you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes back to something that, I guess the idea, you asked about the upstate challenges. One of the things that was really interesting with Utopia when we sort of first got a list of documents was everyone in the US had literally no idea what anything of the terminology meant. Like Canadian CSL, Canadian Standard Lumber. We don't, like the builders and everyone in the US was like, what is this thing that you sent us? But I think that that's like a larger sort of theme of how do you create a universal language around the things that we're talking about? And how do we create sort of an idea that, we have to all work together? I think Joe's exactly right. I mean, I guess you go back to sort of like the chaos theory and the butterfly effect, right? Like we're all interconnected in this whole thing. And you push water from one side of the ocean, from North America, guess where it's going? It's going somewhere else, right? And the point is that how is it that my theory about all of this is, how do we come to the table in forums like this, in places where we can all sit and say, how do we solve this problem? Bring all available resources to the table, knowing that the technology that we may need to truly get there may not be there today, but let's put in our best efforts today to solve this. And I think that part of it's going to be dependent upon all of us putting our best foot forward. And I think that that's why it's exciting from us and in New York to see what the governor's doing and how our agency's pushing this forward, but certainly to see, around the world actions that are being taken. And I think it's that the thing that we found in New York and what COVID has taught us is that like-minded, folks have to stick together to solve problems. We've done this in the United States during COVID, regionally. And I think this is the same thing here. So really appreciate the opportunity.
So just to finalise then, because we've all talked about how much more, sorry, my dog is barking in the background, so I do apologise. A few of these are used to it actually on the call already. So just to finalise, we've all discussed about how we have to be more integrated, we have to be more connected, all of these different elements of construction, accreditation, finance, policies, we all have to talk to each other and we have to be more aligned. But how do we do that? Because there's obviously a disconnect. So how do we actually achieve that, guys? And I'll let you kind of all jump in with your thoughts.
I'll jump in straight away. I think the critical one is everyone around this panel, it's about creating that environment and the investment. For me, we always step away from talking commercial and sustainability of this. And the word green sometimes gets in the way. So my challenge is we've got to create that environment, the investment that allows us to mainstream this, and that's unlocking the opportunity. So this is some hard-nosed economic opportunities here, as well as delivering social value, committed around SDGs have been there a while, but actually they're a good metric to see if we're on the right path. So for me, it is that working together and creating that investment environment that unlocks it.
Yeah, I have to say the same. One of the things that I've worked terribly hard on is being someone in the construction space or ecotech space, energy construction, IoT space, whatever you want to call it, and having to go and knock on doors and bring all the pieces together, whether it is Samsung State of New York, BREEAM, UK BCSD, Lloyd's. I think an active part needs to be played on the ground and innovators need to get given the opportunity. I had an amazing reference to Department of International Trade once, and they, people have heard it, but they said, why is it taking so long, Joe? You seem so far forward. You're only 28 years old. You've raised this money. How come you've made such an impact, and how do other people do it in the UK? And I turned around and said, well, it took a kid raising, tens of millions, building a school, being from homelessness, building in Africa, buying his own development and breaking records in UK delivery and building at your old establishment park. But yet we work with the state of New York and they work in tandem with us to deliver a deliverable. And I think it's companies and innovators that are responsible for the innovation. And as James said, yeah, we may not have all the answers and tools now, but innovators need to get together, and those innovators need to drive all the traditional institutes together. And we want to get around the table consistently, not just talk shops or workshops or actual consistency, and keep building a message with products for consumers building. Because ultimately, it doesn't matter what any of us say, we are building something someone will own for 25 years and their kids will inherit. And therefore, the consumer is the individual that wants to live inside it. So therefore, if we can get that message to the consumer rights as collectives, as the industry and as policymakers and financiers and states, that will be reflected on the consumer, and it will have the, I call it the Tesla effect. It will have a all-encompassing beauty effect for the future of our generations to live and build into something great rather than bit pied.
Right, Shamir, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I guess I'd only kind of reference the call to action here, really. I think for those who are listening and watching, those who are kind of following it up on some sort of catch-up device on a podcast or something, that we have set our stall out that we are actively working together in a capacity to drive some of this change. If there are others out there that want to join and take part, come and find us. We're open and willing to engage and share and learn in the most open way you can possibly imagine. And I think that's the real testimony of people around this call and countless others. And the other thing I would say to people, look at the SDGs and the 17 and the 100 and so indicators, or whatever lens at which they're looking at their issues. Context is critical, and a development in one part of the world has to take into account its context, and not to be put off by what might be perceived to be an awful lot of complexity, because it is doable. And we've got projects and examples here today that we can reference that are all about context. And absolutely, we cannot ignore the role of time. We don't have much time, and we need to act now.
So David, do you want to jump in next, and then James?
Yeah, I was just trying to think about how to succinctly say, how to deal with it, which is quite, as I said, is quite a complicated problem. But I guess the common theme that I've come on is around education, really, which is about not just self-education, so like that curiosity to make sure we're finding out the things that we don't know, but also stakeholder education, be that clients, be it investors, whatever. But also, like I say, ourselves, be it our institution or us as individuals. But I think the thing that I come back to, where we're really focusing is the why. So there's the societal aspects and the environmental, but increasingly, like Jason said, it's the economic case as well, that they're not completely disparate binary things, that there is a convergence around some of these things. But also then what we see from our clients is once they're at the table, the how. So to disclosure, to certification, and making it easy to understand what good looks like and how they do it. And finally, it's the what, because you go down the funnel of, I get it, how do I show that I'm ready to do it and ready to take action and be willing to do that? But then crucially, you get to action, don't you? And that's really, I think, where it gets to the product and the certifications and all this stuff. I think that education is a useful sort of funnel, I think, as I see it.
Great, thank you. And then James, finally.
Yeah, I mean, I would sort of echo, it's undoing the inertia of the world we live in. And I think that, the role of the mandate of government is massively important. I mean, if I look at sort of the fact that government can play a huge role in dictating the type of buildings that can be built on their soil, in their work, and under their jurisdiction. Government can say what you can and cannot build. And there is a massive importance for governments around the world to take a look at this exact fact. I think the consumer aspect, is certainly a huge aspect for folks. And I think that comes to ease of use. You have to break down the barriers of entry for people to sort of find, locate the green house, this, that, the other thing, how they get stuff certified, how they do that. The barriers to entry need to continue to be broken down. And the last thing is just follow the money. I think there's economics. I think the economics of good decision-making around the built environment speaks for itself. But I also think that as global financial institutions around the world sort of shift where they're deploying capital, they need to be taking the leadership to say, we're just not going to lend unless you have the right type of asset we're going to lend to. And I think that at that point, they're de-risking themselves. But really, as I said, when the first call after BlackRock announced that they were shifting their assets towards climate focus was to BlackRock and say, tell me, what can I do? What do you need to see? We want to be as transparent. And I think that's it, is just those three things. So that's kind of where my belief for today. But
Great,
call
thank
to
you.
action, Shamir's exactly right.
Great, thank you. And just to finalise, we have had a couple of questions in from the audience. One for David. They were wondering if the tool you were discussing is open to try and use, because they'd love to try it. And I'm guessing this is the green building tool.
Yeah, so depending on the domicile of that person who's asking the question, then yes, the people that created that tool actually are from the Netherlands, and it works across Western Europe. We've brought it into the UK. Without speaking for them, I'm sure they would look at other geographies. So we're happy to make that connection. And I guess just whilst we're talking about it, I think what's really fascinating, to Shamir's point about, taking people on a journey and educating, that tool is based on EPCs. Now, for those that are well versed in what is a green building, we know EPCs are fundamentally flawed. However, we have to start getting a lot of people on this journey. And then actually, once we get into that conversation, what we do is say, hang on a minute, this might say EPCB, but did you know that the real thing is about how it operates actually? And the real thing, the really long-term thing, is how it gets from being nothing and how it gets to being nothing again. What is that end-to-end cycle of carbon? So it's a long-winded way of saying yes, drop me an email and I can hook that up.
I can add to that just quickly as well. In addition to that, we are working in conjunction at the moment with Lloyds. There is the IO2 and energy piece that Etopia do is around retrofit, and we've had some discussions with the Dutch company that are hopefully going to enable a quicker trigger on that. But final piece on the EPC, just to show EPC is an evaluation, but we got 110 out of 100 on one of our houses recently, and it didn't consider the battery. So when you consider that it's 110 out of 100, and if you add the battery, it probably would have been like 140. It does show that it's a consumer journey that takes time. And then we have to transition that into tangible efforts, which BREEAM obviously working with and other people are aligned with.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Joe. That's an incredible result. Just one last question, and we are going to have to jump off. Should we standardise certain parameters for construction related to sustainability worldwide, taking into account third world countries? And I think Shamir, probably as global head of BREEAM, you're probably the best person to answer this one.
No problem at all. And I think we've recognised that actually you can get a lot of synergy and alignment from a global perspective, but yet allow there to be local adaptation in context of the country, climatic region, and so forth. So actually what we did earlier this year, we had our BREEAM in use scheme. We used to run a UK version and then an international version. And actually, in a very kind of post-imperialistic kind of view of the world, we decided that probably wasn't a good idea. So actually we've dropped that now, and we only run the international version as the latest version of the in use scheme. And in time, we will actually update all of our programs to have purely an international version to allow for local adaptation as well. So a lot of it is already in flight. And if whoever asks that question, if they're in a particular part of the world where I think actually we don't have a BREEAM asset in that country, then let's connect and see if we can make it happen.
Great. So I think that's us. We have overrun slightly, but I think it was all great content, as I'm sure you'll all agree. So thank you all so much for joining us. Please do reach out to our speakers via LinkedIn. I hope you don't mind me saying that, guys, but if they have any further questions, then do link up with them. But thank you all for joining us this, afternoon in UK, morning in the US, and we hope you have a lovely day. Thank you so much.